Grace. I'm gonna learn on the fly while we're doing this. I think I'm pretty prepared. I'm happy to see everybody in the room. Real quick, let me get this out the way. Pursuant to the provision of 2.68.030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, please take notice that decisions of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County Community Oversight Board may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law writ. Of certiorari. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the board. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure the time and procedural requirements are met. Now that we've gotten that out the way, like I said, I appreciate everybody for being here. I have my notes. Same rule as we've been going. As I see people turn their name tags around, as I see people turn their name tags around, I will call on you as a circle facilitator. Establish quorum. I think we're all here in attendance. And then let's proceed. So first on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Everybody should have them sitting in front of them. So once everybody gets through looking at them, I'll take a motion.
Move motion. I move that the minutes be approved as submitted.
Discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions?
I'm abstaining because I wasn't.
Minutes approved. And I'm going to try to move through this and be expedient as possible and try to get us out of here by 6. So first on the agenda is the fines and fees technical assistance grant. Yeah. There's a mic at the podium as well.
You want us to stand?
We can either stand at the podium or we can. Yeah.
Took the long way around, apparently. Thank you, Vice Chair Gooch. Hello, Board. My name is Marcus Floyd. In front of you in your handout, you have sort of a slide deck that Ann Havard, who is also with the Mayor's Office, she's the Senior Economic Opportunity Advisor for Mayor Riley. She prepared the slide deck to inform this Board and the community at large about 2 grant opportunities that Metro had applied for and then received. The grant opportunities are to provide technical assistance to review the structure of our fines and fees, particularly as it relates to criminal justice. Right now in the process, there's a memorandum of understanding with both National League of Cities and PFM's Center for Justice and Safety Finance. The memorandum of understandings both proceeded through council last night, were approved. Ultimately, what this will do is provide the city with a clearer understanding of what fines and fees are being assessed within the criminal justice system, and then where the revenue from those fines and fees end up. Right now, we don't have a clear understanding of that. So PFM, the Center for Justice and Safety Finance, will work with the Criminal Court Clerk's Office, with Metro Finance, to do a deep dive into the data to determine how much money we're collecting and then where that money goes after it's been collected. They'll provide us with a readout in September that will help us, if we choose to implement the plan, maybe move away from fines and fees, or at least reduce the city's reliance on fines and fees. As we know, fines and fees, particularly related to criminal justice, have a disparate impact on people with low income or people of color. And so as a city, we want to make sure that we aren't promoting inequality in any way. And so this is just one step, the first step in the process to address that as far as fines and fees is concerned. I'll let Ann talk a little bit about National League of Cities and then the asks that we have of this board.
So both of these engagements are complementary. I don't think we see them as duplicative. We need as much help as we can get for this assessment. The National League of Cities is an opportunity that's a peer learning opportunity with other cities across the country that are looking at how to make fines and fees structures in municipalities more equitable. So we may be a part of a group of cities that are not just looking at criminal justice fines and fees, but maybe looking at water and utilities bills as well, things like that. So the National League of Cities engagement will be a little more high level and then focused on that peer learning opportunity, whereas the PFM engagement is a little more hands-on and in-depth. PFM is in the process right now of starting to analyze and collect data with us in the clerk's office and Metro Finance. And then PFM will actually have a site visit in June that we want to talk to you all about as well. One more thing on the National League of Cities engagement, it is a little more focused on how we apply that equity lens to fines and fees structures, and then also how we can connect residents to financial empowerment services. As some of you may know, the Nashville Financial Empowerment Center is a partnership between the Mayor's Office and United Way, and they provide free one-on-one financial counseling to any Davidson County resident focused on reducing debt, increasing savings, and improving credit scores. So we're looking for ways that we can also connect people in the justice system to financial empowerment services. And then I'll let Marcus talk a little bit about our main asks of you all.
And so we had an opportunity to meet with the executive team last week, I believe, just to preview this engagement. As a part of the PFM, the Center for Justice and Safety Finance engagement, they asked us to put together a steering committee of criminal justice stakeholders and interested individuals within the community that once they provide us with a plan, that will sort of guide the implementation of that plan, determine which initiative we might want to push forward, or we might want to hold back. And we would like for a member of the Community Oversight Board to serve as a part of that steering committee, if you are interested.
And I think the executive team had also asked us about the membership of that steering committee. Will include the mayor, district attorney, public defender, Chief Anderson, sheriff, Judge Blackburn, since she's the presiding judge over General Sessions Court, Howard Gentry, John Cooper, director of Metro Legal, Talia Lomax O'Neill, director of Metro Finance. We'll have a council member representative, State Senator Jeff Yarbrough, hopefully a representative from the Community Oversight Board, and then also Betty Kirkland from Project Return, which is a reentry organization.
So, you guys have questions?
And I wanted to say, in the conversation that the executive committee had with you all, it did seem like an amazing opportunity for community members to also get involved. And we talked about the participation of this board being kind of working lockstep and indirectly touching on the same things as what this steering committee would do. And I think any one of us would be great if the board so moves, so chooses. I'm curious about what people are thinking about the opportunity. I know the steering committee the executive committee here already kind of had a conversation around it, but I definitely think it's important for us all to have a conversation.
And if we can interject, and I'll have Ann talk a little bit about, I think it might help to inform the discussion to know what's going to be asked of the steering committee members.
Yeah. So the steering committee will meet 2 or 3 times in person. There may be one conference call. The kickoff site visit in June, we'll have a steering committee meeting, and then that site visit in June will also, PFM will conduct some one-on-one interviews. They'll also do a roundtable with people that have been impacted by fines and fees. So certainly, I think steering committee members that may have any input on how we facilitate that roundtable, we would appreciate that. So it is a time-limited engagement because we are expecting to get that report back in August, the draft report, the final report in September, and then we'll move into implementation and figure out kind of what the role of the steering committee looks like after that.
I guess we don't need to raise all our hand at one time. So I'll volunteer for it.
Perfect. I mean, I don't know if that takes a motion or.
Yeah,
That's what I was
we
gonna
should
ask.
go ahead and do a
Yeah.
motion for that.
Okay.
No, I have a question, so I'll go to the motion.
No, I think feel free to ask your question.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I'm Phyllis Hildreth. I don't have a name card today. Given the limited time frame for this study, I'm wondering about, I am pleased to know that we have been invited to have, thank you, one representative, but I'm also wondering how this body will have an opportunity to deliberate and discuss among ourselves what we're thinking about it as it progresses, so that if all of that work happened between our time to meet, we don't have a full force and effect of the board responding. So a couple of questions. Since this is going to be a data-rich enterprise, is it contemplated that there will be sort of interim reports or findings that may be available to our executive director, who can then make them available to the board members so that we can communicate back with the executive director, and who can then communicate with our designated representatives so that we may be apprised of the progress, have some input, but also be respectful of all of the restrictions on communication? Can all this happen within the joint time frames?
I think yes to all of that. Yes. I don't see a problem with that at all.
Because there will at least be some initial findings at the site visit in June, and then so there will be some sort of deck or something out of that we could share, and then the draft report in August. So.
Thank you. With that clarification, I would like to move that Member Holloway be appointed as the designee from the Community Oversight Board to this task force.
Second.
All in favor? I'm sorry, discussion? I didn't think so. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions?
All right. Thank you, board. Thank you, Mr. Holloway.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And next on the agenda is the executive committee meeting readout. If you kind of lead us in that discussion, Dr. Hildreth, you can kind of, glad you're here, if you can kind of fill in where you may.
Yep, I am happy to do that, although I will say I don't think that there was anything discussed at the executive committee meeting that is not on our agenda today, so I don't want to be duplicative of that. Also, I would note that all of the matters discussed by the executive committee were informative. There were no official actions taken by the executive committee to report back to this board. But just to give you the very quick summary of the meeting, we received the same report from Ms. Harvard and Mr. Floyd that the full board just heard. We received a report from our first Vice Chair, Campbell Gooch, about his attendance at the workshop on police community engagement at NYU. And we received an update from Mr. Whedon on personnel hiring, office space, and budgeting. All of those matters are just on our agenda for today, so I would suggest that I defer any further details on my report to those discussions.
Dr. Hidges, would you like to add anything?
Mr. Chair, I was not present at the meeting. I was out of country.
I'm so used to you being around. I'm sorry. As far as and I'll just move on to the next agenda item. As far as the NYU workshop, do you mind if I start?
I don't mind a bit.
So it was really informative. They were definitely curious about the work that has been done up until this point, and also about where our board is. We were kind of like the newbies in the room, so there was a lot of attention directed our way as far as just the work. They were super excited that we were involved. Kind of the takeaways, it was more of a mastermind meeting than a training, kind of like everybody brainstorming. So the idea is that there will be documents as a result of the whole brainstorming session. A lot of it was taken down and recorded and all of those things, and then those materials will be made accessible to everyone who is involved in any type of oversight work. And that was the whole goal of the whole entire process and mastermind meeting. And they did also give mention on what should be happening next, right? They kind of talked about the power of oversight boards as a back-end response. And so they started talking about front-end response, like review, auditing. I'm sorry, I have a very thick accent, and monitoring. And so it was very informative, very informative. Dr. Lewis.
I don't have anything to add.
Yes.
I think as we do trainings, attend trainings, particularly out of town, and funding that we're spending, that we receive a written report back as to what happens in the trainings, whether it's brainstorming or whatever. We need to have some kind of summary submitted back to the board.
We'll do. And I'll also make available everything I received, me and Ms. Adele received from the training. The training was an immersion exercise. I believe I showed you, Ms. Ross.
Some papers.
Yeah, it was like we were all members of a community, and then we got things like the demographics, and then also we walked through a scenario where we all came up with solutions. And so I'll make sure all those materials are available.
Appreciate it.
And just as a point of clarification, I don't think it cost Metro anything to send us, did it? Yeah, the Institute paid for everything.
Yeah. Dr. Hitch.
I believe that's correct, although technically the Institute awarded a grant to Metro so that we could do that. So there was official, there's still official taxpayer involvement in that. And so I want to echo what Member Ross said about making sure that we always have a written report, have copies of, and the continuing concern that that be warehoused at a place on the COB official website so that it is very easy to direct each other and our publics to those sources so that we can follow along. And so I look forward to working with Director Whedon directly in terms of how we can do that, and I will volunteer to make sure that I work with whomever else we need to do to make sure that the design is clear and appropriate and people know where to go to look for it. So thank you.
Do I need a motion on that?
It sounds like just a practice at this point.
Yeah.
And I
Okay,
think
yeah.
the Rules Committee could even look at that if that's something they're so interested
Okay.
in. So,
Because I do like the idea and to continue the culture of transparency when it comes to those type things. If there's no other discussion about it, I figure we just move on to the next. Mr. Whedon's going to kind of give us an update on the COB personnel in our office space.
Indeed.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I did deliver a email listing the update, but I will repeat that again. At the present time, I have the pleasure of announcing that we have obtained an assistant director, Ms. Jill Fitchard, who joins us from the Public Defender's Office. In fact, Ms. Fitchard is here today. Several of the board members met her at the NACO conference last week. It's a pleasure to have her on board. I think she's going to be a great asset to the Oversight Board. And as a matter of fact, we participated in some personnel events yesterday, Ms. Fitchard and I. So we welcome her to the board. In addition to her, we were also able to obtain via lateral hire an executive assistant, Ms. Paula Pearson, who will join us later in June as an executive assistant. She comes to us from the Historical Society. It's expected that she may join us, and Ms. Pearson, they both may join us around the 17th of June. In addition to that, we've also interviewed for the legal advisor position. 2 or 3 weeks ago, we interviewed 3 candidates for that position. Tomorrow, we're going to interview 2 more candidates for the legal advisor position. We expect to make a decision on that position later this week, early next week. And in addition, Ms. Fitchard and I, as I mentioned earlier, we interviewed for the 3 legal advisor positions yesterday. There were a total of 11 candidates that we interviewed. And from those 11 candidates, I do believe that we're going to find 3 people to fill the open positions for the investigator slot. So we're looking forward to having the office about 3/4 staffed by mid-June. All of the positions should be filled by the 17th of June, which I believe is the next rotation for human resources to make a smooth transition for new hires. So we're looking at the 17th of June, bringing on those 6 positions, and that leaves available to be filled the community affairs position and the 2 research analyst positions. So we look forward to filling those. Hopefully by the end of June, the department can be fully staffed. And as I transition to that, I should talk about office space. We have, at this present time, located a facility. It's the Washington Square building. That is the current location that we're assigned right now, 222 North 2nd Street. There's issues there, of course, with parking, and maybe the downtown location may be difficult for some community members to make, but we can have discussions about that. But at the present time, the permanent facility will be at 222 North 2nd Street. And let's see, we don't have a temporary facility just yet, but I understand that there may be some space also available at the Washington Square address for us to temporarily house. If it's the same space that I saw about a month ago, it will probably comfortably house about 5 staff members there, 5, maybe 6 staff members. And so I believe it's going to take about 4 months for the lease of the Washington Square or any other building that we decide to use to pass through committee. So we're going to have a comfortable temporary space for several weeks until the permanent space lease passes, wherever that permanent space may be. One other issue I wanted to talk about is an important one. It's one I've been working on pretty diligently for the past several weeks. That's training. I mentioned earlier that there was a NACO training just last week. Several of the board members here and several of the community members were present at the NACO training. It was well attended. Lots of attendees and community oversight members from other jurisdictions were here: Washington, D.C., Memphis, Knoxville, Atlanta, Denver. Shared a lot of good information about what they're doing in their jurisdictions, and some of the information that they shared we'll definitely put to use here in Nashville. One of the most exciting of those was, I think, Knoxville is doing an internship program, and some other good things over there in Knoxville. I spoke with their director, and I think I'm going to take a trip there to find out exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it. I'd like to implement that here as well. We've also talked with Metro Police Department about doing training for our staff members. In fact, I've been in contact with Metro, and I sent them, they were able to send me a list of all of their training programs, both the basic officer, new officer training programs and the in-service training programs for their members. Got the full list, and very accommodating. The director of training there told me to pick out the programs that I thought might be beneficial to our staff members. There's several of those programs that are very beneficial. Of course, they're set up for police officers, new academy members, so they're very lengthy and in detail. I don't believe our staff members need that much detail. In fact, when I counted up all the hours that I had selected, it came up to about 820 hours. That's probably a little bit more time than we really want to devote to that training, although we want those core competencies in civilian oversight. I think a sufficient training program will probably be in the area of 6 to 8 weeks. I'm going to work with Metro to whittle that down to something a little bit more digestible for our purposes. I think 6 to 8 weeks should be good, but we're definitely going to cover some relevant issues dealing with police department procedures, protocols, operations, methods, legal standards, and of course, use of force. Talk to Metro also about getting everyone into the Citizens Academy. Of course, we have that obligation. There is a Citizens Academy coming up in June, but we're going to try to get hopefully a special program available that we can go into, or the board can go into, with 11 members and attend that Citizens Academy, Metro Police Department Citizens Academy. So we look forward to doing that as well. Another training program we're looking at, I was in touch with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. They have several training opportunities available. I contacted the Memphis office. They're willing to put something together for us, come here to Nashville and train us in color of law issues, civil rights issues. They have a evidence response team that shows how they collect evidence and what they do with evidence at crime scenes and things of that sort. That would probably be very beneficial to our staff. So we're looking forward to having them here at some point. As soon as we get the Metro schedule together, I think I talked to the FBI and said we'll get them on board as soon as our Metro schedule gets together. So we're looking forward to that. They also have a Citizens Academy at the FBI. Unfortunately, that was just held in March. They have it in Nashville once a year. That was just held in March. It's about a 6-week program. The next one's going to be in Memphis. They have it in Memphis once a year and in Nashville once a year. So the next one's in Memphis. They already had Nashville. Missed out on that, but hopefully we can get involved in that next year. I think that'll be beneficial for both the staff and the board to be a part of the FBI's Citizen Academy program. And other programs we're looking at, Northwestern University has a very good program dealing with internal affairs investigations. Going to try to get a hold of them and arrange for them to come down here and put on a program with new civilian oversight investigators. They have a good internal affairs program syllabus there at Northwestern. And National Institute of Justice has a very good program online that our staff members and board members or any member of the public that may be interested in the field of civilian oversight, I believe, can take those classes online. Most of them are free if you are in a law enforcement related position with the National Institute of Justice. I think we're going to try to do some of those online classes. Also will be very beneficial to our core competencies of the staff members. So those are some of the good training programs that we have lined up. Looking forward to getting that done. Looking forward to getting the staff members on board. I think once we get these training programs down and our core competencies covered, with the background of the investigators that we have, our assistant director, and the other potential staff members, we'll be pretty well situated to begin full operations by the end of June. So we're looking forward to that.
Thank you for that, Mr. Weed. Mr. Howard.
They have one program with the training academy that's very important that we could observe. Some of us have already gone through that process, and that's when to shoot and when not to shoot.
Yes.
that's what's troubling the country now. So it'd be interesting that we could see it, if this board could see a video or see them perform some of the videotapes that they do. They got a screen where you see engaging activity, and up on the screen you react when do you shoot, when not to shoot. And so it's most important that we as a board understand that, because the average citizen really don't have a clue. Only thing they know that somebody related to them has been harmed, and they don't understand why. And it would behoove this board to be able to see a video or something of that nature.
Absolutely. That was one of the programs I definitely recommended that we take, the shoot, don't shoot, I think they call them scenarios, the real life scenarios. There's several other real life scenarios that they have. I think they sometimes call it verbal judo scenarios, where officers are using language to de-escalate situations, things like that. So there's several real life situation classes that they have there at the academy that we'll participate in. So I think I pretty much got all of the bases covered. But if there's any other suggestions that you might have, or the chief or anyone else, definitely make sure that I get it on the list of courses to take.
Chief Turner.
Couple of things. I believe that the shoot, don't shoot scenario is incorporated into the Citizen Police Academy curriculum. So I think it would be good if all of us, including myself, would go and visit that training, the Citizen Police Academy. The other thing, and had a conversation earlier about office location. And I don't know if it's possible, but I know there's a great demand for office space in Nashville. And if there's any way possible to facilitate getting space other than downtown, I think it would be very beneficial, because as people try to access the office, it's going to be a hardship on people paying $10 or $20 to park in a lot downtown to get to the 222 building. So, Marcus, I don't know if you can help sort of push that through or what, but I just think it would be good if we could try to locate space other than somewhere out of the downtown urban area.
Yeah, and there's been a few hang-ups with the space. I don't know if, Marcus, you want to talk about kind of like what we...
Yeah, that's understood. The DA's office is in that building, and parking is a nightmare. The only issue is the time frame. Negotiating space with Metro IT, building out space to support the staff members. That's going to take time. With the 222 Washington Square building, they're providing that temporary space where the COB staff would move in within the next 2 weeks. So that's kind of the only issue, is that if we try to go somewhere, and we're still looking for permanent space outside of that. We'll continue to work with Mr. Wheaton on that to try to get that sorted out. But that timing issue is the most concerning.
Ms. Ross.
Mr. Wheaton, could you update us on the board on the meeting with the police chief and Office of Professional Accountability?
It's, I think it was probably about maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had a meeting with the chief of police and the director of the Office of Professional Accountability. It's a cordial meeting, first meeting. We discussed some of the needs of our office procedurally, things like responding to a crime scene, when we would be contacted to respond, what our jurisdiction would be. Of course, our jurisdiction right now is very similar to OPA's jurisdiction. Access to records, access to witnesses at the crime scenes, things like that. We put forth those recommendations to the chief, and he wanted us to mainly put those recommendations in writing for his consideration, and we're We're doing that right now. Part of what we're doing in the Rules Committee is drafting some procedures and guidelines for the operation of the office. And I think we're going to put those into the form of a recommendation or recommendations for the chief to be presented with, to let him know that this is what we need to function properly as he requested. In addition to that, I'm also in the process of drafting standard operating procedure for the office. There is a standard operating procedure currently in place for OPA, and I'm drafting basically based upon what OPA already has, but expanding it for our needs to fit what we need to do. So that's something I'm working on presently, and we're going to work on more once we get the legal advisor here. But something that definitely needs to be done. And also when we can present those recommendations to the chief when we have a legal advisor to assist us as well. But I think we're doing a good job in committee right now with the Rules Committee as far as getting those procedures together that we need to present to the chief. So we'll do that hopefully very soon.
Ms. Ross?
One other thing that you didn't mention, the chief was, so we asked a question about the satellite police departments like Vanderbilt and TSU. And one of my concerns was that officers who monitor the streets of Nashville, if citizens have a contact with them, that incident, who do we report to? Do these satellite sites come under the Oversight Board? So one of the things that the chief recommended to us is that we talk to the satellite sites at some point. And I think as we're doing our policies and procedures and rules, then we need to really look into that beforehand.
Yes, that's a good point. That's something that we definitely need to clarify in the rules. That's going to be a topic definitely for our legal advisor once we get that person on board to get some clarification on that. I know Vanderbilt has a pretty large police force, probably close to 100, not exactly 100, but pretty close to 100. Pretty active police force as well. So, yes, we need to address that issue.
And what's the timetable for the legal advisor? When are we looking to get that person in?
Legal advisor? Well, we will interview tomorrow. It's going to be it'll be by the end of the week, early next week. As I said, I think we can expect all of the 6 positions that we've interviewed for so far to be filled by June 17th. Right now, the community affairs position just closed. I understand there was a good response to that advertisement, but I haven't got the list of candidates yet for that particular position, but I heard there was a good response. We'll probably interview for that position in the next couple of weeks once we get everything else squared away on the other positions.
Any other questions for Mr. Wheaton? Thank you, Mr. Wheaton.
Thank you.
And then, Mr. Sweeney, you want to update us on the bylaws and the rules and
Sure.
procedures?
So on the bylaws, the 2 committees, bylaws and rules, met together and did a final review on the bylaws for the purpose of seeing whether there was anything else that should be adjusted or changed or deleted from the previous proposals. And we affirmed what we had done before and had a couple of suggestions, and I think Alex is going to walk through the actual language. And the bylaws committee voted to recommend to the board the consideration of this draft of the bylaws. So it's in a position for action by the board when the board is ready to act upon it.
Mr. Vice Chair, if you're comfortable, I'll just go ahead and go through. You'll see the first comment that we have is one where I just noted that I had to remove some Oxford commas, even though that's a big source of contention amongst all of us. Most of the draft is written without the Oxford comma, so for the sake of consistency, I kept it out. I won't go over each comma that I removed or each spacing issue that I found. We'll just go over the substantive changes. So first, we deleted the word board because that's defined later on. And again, as we've become accustomed to with this, if someone sees something that they want to talk about more, just give me a hey and we'll stop and we'll talk about it some more. Article 1, we added the second sentence just to clarify that nothing in the bylaws is intended to take away from your rights under state law and metro law or the charter. Down in Article 3, subsection C, executive director and director are kind of used interchangeably throughout, so we just said that either one of those is intended to designate the position of the executive director of the board. Next page, we define public building as buildings owned by the metropolitan government. That's consistent with the Metro Code, which that's how it defines it. That's where we have to, in order to have a public meeting, you have to have it in a building owned by the metropolitan government. So that's what that one is. Next one is Article 6 on page 5. Obviously, we don't yet know the location of the place, so we're just going to say that it's in Davidson County. We can all agree that the COB will eventually be housed in Davidson County at such location as the board may approve. Next change is Article 8, Section 2. I deleted the word full in front of board. This has to do with an issue that Mr. Cooper raised last time about kind of how, and we'll go into it at the very end. It's kind of the last big issue that has to be determined. But this just removes it, and basically how you vote will be dealt with in one provision instead of just kind of being scattershot throughout the bylaws. So the next change will be Article 8, Section 3, subsection F. This has come about with, as it relates to another board that I advise. We want to make sure if there's ever a situation, and this should be used very rarely because there's not a ton of legal support for your actions, but if the executive committee ever had to make an emergency decision, we want to make sure that it's in the bylaws that would have to be subsequently approved by the board. And so I do need to change a couple typos on it. The comma after the word meetings on the first line should be deleted. And the word to, T-O, after and should be also taken off. And so it will read that the executive committee can act on behalf of the board in emergency situations between meetings and obtain subsequent approval for such emergency action at the next board meeting. Okay, anybody have any questions about that? Okay. The next one, Section 5 of that same article. Again, this is consistent with the earlier issue. We try to make it to where it says that the board acts, and then we deal with how the board acts in one provision later on. So that's just duplicative language. So Article 10, we just removed the word person. I think that was just left in from a previous draft. The Article 11, what we did is we made public buildings a defined term, as you saw earlier. And there was some concern about making sure that these were reasonably accessible to the community and compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we included this sentence to say that in selecting the public buildings for its regular meetings and open public forums, the board shall prioritize locations reasonably accessible to the community and compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay. Article 12, there's an addendum that says consistent with the requirements of state law. Again, this just ensures that there's no attempt to make a conflict between the bylaws and state law. Your rights are those as listed under state law. A typo is removed from Article 13. Article 14, Section 2, subsection B. I removed this last clause here because I noticed it says, as listed, the call of meeting to order says that the presiding officer shall call the meeting to order at the time stated in the notice for such meeting, provided there is a quorum present. And generally speaking, the board can still call itself to order without quorum. And there may be that things that are on the board's agenda don't require a vote, and so you could basically conduct most or all of your meeting provided that you just know that you're unable to vote on things. You'd have to defer your minutes, for instance, your approval of your minutes, that would have to be deferred to the next meeting. But you can still meet, you just can't take any official action. So that's why I suggested striking that. Okay, subsection C of section 2, the word present is removed because we're addressing that in the next paragraph. And then we get to subsection D, and Mr. Sweeney and I will not disappoint you by not having another argument. So we have yet one more debate. Hopefully this will be the last one, and you all will be able to vote on this today if possible. So here's the issue. What it takes to establish quorum for you to be able to vote is 6 members. We all agree with that. It's the majority membership. The next question becomes, once you have quorum, that issue is set aside, basically. And it becomes, what does it take for the board to affirmatively vote something into action? Okay, so there's a couple ways you could phrase this. One of which, and no one's really asserting this, so maybe we can take this one off the table quickly, is that a motion or resolution, this is the second sentence in there, a motion or resolution passes upon the affirmative vote of a majority of board members. This one would be one that we don't want to have because it means that pretty much every time you vote something, you're going to have 6 people voted into action. So I think we can all probably agree that we don't want to have 6 people voting every time something is determined. Otherwise, you might be in a position where if you only have 6 people there and you have quorum, it has to be a unanimous vote in order for the board to act. So I don't think anyone's advocating that, but I wanted to say that is an option. So I'm going to temporarily strike that. We can always bring it back. The next argument comes whether or not the language should be a majority of members present or a majority of members present and voting. The default standard for most Metro boards and Robert's Rules of Order is a majority of members present and voting. The reason being that there may possibly be some abstentions. And if you say that, let's say that there's 6 of you all are here and 2 people abstain, if the language says passes by a majority of those present and voting, then it just needs to be 3 of the final 4 people in order to pass something. But if you say the majority present, then those 2 members who are abstaining act as no votes. It just makes it a little harder for the board to vote something into action, in my opinion. I will let Matt describe his opinion as to why he thinks it present would be the appropriate language.
I agree with Alex that in most situations, present and voting is the default standard. But because of the unique character of this board and how it's composed, and with the strong community component of the board, I was concerned that if you have it as a standard of present and voting, that you could have where 6 people are present and you have 3 people abstain, you could have a decision made by 2 members of the board. And I didn't think that in the character of this board that would be the best standard. So that's why I thought that it should be the majority of those present rather than present and voting. It heightens the standard some.
And I'll put one point that I just want to make is that there's a remote possibility, but there is always a possibility. If you have enough people abstain from something, the board could be in a position where it couldn't act at all. Like if there was some situation that came before the board that's for some reason required 6 people to abstain. Again, I'm not saying it's likely, I'm just saying it's empirically possible. The board could not act based on if we used it as just present.
Right. But on the other hand, if you have that many people abstain, the board probably shouldn't act.
Right.
Thank you. At the risk of really messing things up last minute, I would like to think out loud with my committee members, since it's the only time that we can do that. When we were at the point a few weeks back when the state legislation concerning the composition of this board was present, I had the experience of being in the room at the conference committee, where there were 3 members from the Senate and 3 members from the House of Representatives. And I learned at that time a really fascinating voting matrix rule about when a change was proposed, there had to be the 3 members from the Senate considered separately, so a 2 out of 3, and then the same thing with House. And I begin to wonder, thinking out loud together, do we feel that we need to perhaps attend to that in the distinction and the composition of this board? Basically, there are 4 government members, 2 selected by the council, 2 selected by the mayor, and there are 7 public members. With these simple majorities, we almost get to the point where we're talking about a magic number of 6 here. There's a possibility that the government, for all 4 government, have a different weight than the 7 community members. Is this making sense? Maybe this is overthinking it, but I thought that we need to speak this aloud and think about it before we move on. And so that is my question. Is there any merit or concern in adopting a formula that replicates what happens at the state level for the distinction that there are 2 distinct populations within our single Board of 11? And that is my question.
I think that it's important, as we've said, as we've talked through things from the very, very beginning, for us always to remember that we are a community board and that the focus of everything that we do should be community. On the other hand, I'm not certain whether we want to define things that say that you consider community votes one way and you consider other votes another way. On the grounds, is that going to divide the board where the board has acted so well together so far? And that would be my concern as far as trying to make a distinction.
Ms. Ross.
I agree with Mrs. Board Member Sweeney that we don't need to start dividing up how we vote, and then if the state gets their way, then in a year or so, it may not be where you come from or how you were appointed to the board.
Mr. Vice Chair.
And I definitely think, as me and Mr. Sweeney were talking about it at the joint committee meeting, I definitely think we work well together. So my fear and trepidation is having a minority of people approving something. That's just where my immediate fear goes. And then also, Mrs. Sweeney, if you could talk about around if there's a conflict of interest, because we've already kind of presented that one way an abstention becomes a no.
Right.
And so if we can talk around the process of if there is a conflict of interest for someone, how they gracefully bow out.
Right. Well, with any of the various metro boards or agencies or whatever, if you have some type of interest, personal interest in something that's being considered, then there's a conflict. And you can't vote on those matters, and you're not supposed to participate at all. So if there's some contract or whatever, that's coming forward where some group is going to provide us with technical assistance, and, somebody is on the board of that group or has some other interest in that group, that might present a conflict of interest, and therefore they couldn't vote on that matter. So you might lose a person on a particular vote. I can't, just with what we do and what we're tasked to do, I can't envision a situation that we're going to lose more than one person ever due to a conflict on a vote, but that's not to say that it couldn't arise, but I can't conceive of it at the moment. Maybe Alex from seeing other boards and where people have been conflicted out. You can see that.
Abstentions typically are more when people are absent for part of the information than they can be for conflicts of interest. So for instance, Dr. Lewis abstained from voting on the minutes of the past meeting because she wasn't present. So that's an instance where it doesn't really matter if you have a conflict. She didn't feel she was qualified to do it, so she had to abstain. And so for purposes of voting on the minutes, that would have been a no vote if it's listed as present. If multiple people are, let's say we only had 6 for this meeting, and then in the next meeting, we had a different 6, it's possible that 5 of those people who didn't attend the first but did attend the second would all have to abstain, and you couldn't vote on your minutes. Again, this isn't necessarily likely, but that's probably the most likely instance where something like this might happen.
And that's not actually required, is it?
Well, I mean, it's a board action. And yeah,
Right, but I mean, is it required for you to
board.
abstain if you haven't attended the meeting? To vote on minutes?
I encourage people to
Right.
abstain.
But I don't think it's
unless
actually.
they've reviewed the record.
Yeah, you can review it, you can watch the video.
But that doesn't mean they have. And I think
Right, I'm just saying they
determination
could.
to abstain is
Yeah.
something that you make on your own.
Yeah.
We don't go back and check your backgrounds to make sure you aren't part of some board or commission. For a conflict of interest, it's expected that the board member knows their own conflicts.
Second Vice Chair.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank the members for entertaining the question. I tend to agree with the consensus result, and I wanted to just put some finality to that. So thank you.
I guess then back on the question of present or present voting. And let me say, I appreciate Ms. Hildreth raising that issue. I think it is a thoughtful issue for us to consider. But I think we've reached a good resolution on that. I think what the import is of saying present and voting is that functionally an abstention is a no vote. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I go back to what Mr. Sweeney said, which is if we can't get a majority of those present to vote affirmatively for a proposition, maybe we shouldn't move forward on that proposition. I think the strength of this board, and even though we come from a lot of different means of having been nominated, we come together to all serve the community. And so I think we ought to not go forward with something unless the majority of those people who are present and voting on it are ready to go forward on it. So I don't have a problem with Mr. Sweeney's language. In fact, would advocate for it.
I feel like we're all in consent. If someone is willing to present a motion. Mr. Martinez, you answer.
You said present and voting.
Present and voting, yes. Yes.
You just meant present, though,
You meant
didn't you?
present.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. You're right. My bad. For those who are present, yes.
And I want to echo the same sentiment Mr. Cooper just introduced. Since we are community, it is on us to make difficult decisions. So I'm kind of leaning the same way. I'm leaning the same way as well. But I'm willing to hear a motion if people are willing to move on it.
Well, let me ask, are we at a point, should we go through the rest of this, or should we?
Yeah, if you all will, I think it would be good to get some clarification on a vote for this particular provision, and then the rest will be, it won't take more than a few minutes and then we can vote on the whole thing.
Then I would make a motion that Article 14, Section 2D should read a motion or a resolution passes upon the affirmative vote of a majority of board members present.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
I'm
Abst-
abstaining,
Abstentions?
which is not a no vote.
Proving the point, right? Okay, so on to the Article 15. We just capitalization of the word law, NACOL, as a parenthetical. And then Article 19, we just removed present. Again, we're only defining what votes based on subsection D that we just discussed, so there's not any reference anywhere else that'll confuse everyone. So with that, I think we have an agreement in principle on all of the red line changes.
I move we accept the bylaws as amended.
I say.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay.
Thanks very much to the committee for their
Absolutely.
hard work on this.
Absolutely.
So there's 3 more components, I guess, to overall governance of operations. The next one is rules. And then there's some document on the relationship between us and the police department, which talk about in a little more detail in just a minute, which would either be an amendment to the police manual that would incorporate provisions that would have some kind of cooperative arrangements for the exchange of information or operations or whatever between the 2 organizations, or by a memorandum of understanding designed to do the same thing. And then the last set of documents would be standard operating procedures, which would be on-the-ground, daily sort of things. So we've been working on the rules, and there's still a significant amount that needs to be done from that, and with more feedback from Mr. Whedon. And then the board will take up that and move that forward. The Rules and Bylaws Committee, when we met jointly, agreed that before those rules get finalized, they need to be subject to whatever is exactly the proper word for it, community input as to how we see this entity working. And we think that's the same for whatever the relationship is going to be, or the document that's going to be for the relationship that governs us and the police department together. And both of those will go through an additional step before the board will finalize them. And we'd like to discuss at some point how the board thinks it's best to pursue that. What we discussed is kind of 2 different options. One, to have a community forum of some sort, and the other, to have 1 or more task forces in order to do it. And I think that we generally agreed that having 1 or more task forces would probably be best, because it would provide a greater opportunity to actually be able to work through particular language and particular provisions and make sure that all the community interests are addressed, but then are addressed specifically in words and provisions. But we'd like to talk about that at some point. And then this 4th step, which was standard operating procedures, we only talked about this very, very briefly. But the sense is that that might be best, not for any deep involvement by the committee, if any involvement by the committee, but that's a matter for the executive director and his staff to figure out how they're going to handle their day-to-day activities, subject to the other governing documents that we've done. So that's kind of how we envision it. So there's nothing particular to report on the rules, except we're still working through those. As far as the relationship with the police department, as Mr. Weed and Ms. Ross were both talking before, there was the meeting and there was discussion, as to certain things that we feel that we need from the police department. And the police department said, put it in writing. Put it in writing what it is you want. And so Mr. Whedon went through the police manual and went through and addressed each of those sections in the manual where there seemed to be a appropriate place for interface with the COB, and prepared a draft for the committee to look at that addressed that. We didn't go through that in any detail, but we did go through it and look at it. And we discussed whether or not that was the best approach. Recognizing that all the subjects and issues that Mr. Whedon had identified were ones that need to be addressed. And the question is it best to do it there where they're already kind of identified and worded in their rules, or whether it would be better to propose something like a memorandum of understanding. And we discussed what are the benefits and detriments of each of those. The benefit of the policy and editing the policies is they're there in a lot of detail. And there are places where it's appropriate you can put in, and the COB. Or in this situation, the COB gets notice like other people who are going to have be given notice of the call out or whatever from some incident that's occurred. On the other hand, there was discussion and concern about, well, does that appropriately recognize the independence of the COB if you become part of somebody else's manual? And does that then give you control over that document or changes to that document over time, where it's, again, their document? And then there were discussions about, well, what's the practicality of being able to convince them, or convince anybody, we want you to change your manual so that we're part of your manual and that we have say-so in it. And the general thought, and it's still at a discussion stage, was that it may well be best to proceed as an MOU rather than as amendments to the police manual. And we wanted to bring all of that before the board and get the board's input before we moved further on that about what's the best way to pursue it. And then one other substantive issue that was part of that discussion was we were talking about the allocation of certain responsibilities for handling certain types of matters. Do we and the police department separately handle things? Any complaint? Do we jointly handle any matters? Does one group defer to the other on certain types of matters for certain periods of time? And the general thought which Mr. Whedon proposed and which we all agreed with, subject to discussion as to what it meant, was if it's a complaint by or about the treatment of a member of the public, that's ours. If it's any other type of issue regarding police performance or whatever, that it's the police department's. And then we got into questions which we didn't resolve, but we discussed is, well, does the police officer have to be on duty? Does the police officer have to be acting under some apparent authority, even if they're not on duty? If it's a police officer and they're otherwise private affairs or whatever, does it come in? How does that fit in if you have an abusive relationship of some sort? And we kind of left all those things up in the air. I mean, we decided that it should be public matters and public concerns, but beyond that, we didn't get to the stage of defining as to what those were, but we'll have to get to the stage of defining what those are.
I wanna kind of tackle those things one by one.
Yeah.
I think one of the main things we discussed, Mr. Sweeney, and Mr. Whedon, is either the addition to the manual versus the MOU. If we can kind of have discussion around that, so we can leave here knowing which direction we want to go. I kind of, when we were having the discussion, I thought maybe the clarity of the MOU being laid out for like public sake and also for police sake, but also having maybe a mix of both. But I think it's very important that we have like a focused discussion on what people are thinking around this issue, and I think that should be where we start.
Well, I think putting what we want in the police manual would be preferred. But as Mr. Sweeney has mentioned, and maybe that appearance there is not, but when if we're mentioning the police manual, it would only be by reference, and it wouldn't be part of that. But I could also understand the benefits of the memorandum of understanding as well. I think the memorandum of understanding may be more digestible to the police department rather than make that change to the police department manual to include us. So there are benefits of both. MOU may be the best way to go in this situation. But I think if we were ever to get into a situation in the field where we need some immediate clarification, you can always put the police department manual out of the scene. So when here's a police department manual, this is what it says, this is what we're allowed to do. Whereas with the memorandum of understanding, it may be a little less readily available. One other thing we talked about having a situation that may occur was also that when we were trying to determine the jurisdiction of both departments, the OPA and COB, was that if there were ever a situation where a police officer wanted to make known a situation, if that police officer was to report that to us, would he be considered, or he or she be considered a member of the public at that point, or a member of the department? If a member of the department, then it probably would go to OPA. If a member of the public, of course, it would come to us. So that's only one issue that I think we didn't bring up, Mr. Sweeney didn't bring up, that we talked about.
Thank you. Ms. Lewis?
I feel strongly that a memorandum of understanding is preferable in this case. I think we'll be able to craft that much more nimbly than if we're asking the police to amend their own manual. In my day job, I have a council that is an advisory council to us, and if they try to insert themselves into the standard operating procedures of my office, I would object strongly to that. So that's just my 2 cents.
I think that I agree with Ms. Lewis, but one thing that would be helpful, Mr. Sweeney or Mr. Whedon, is give us some particulars. What exactly are we talking about proposing to put into the police manual? Let me say, just as an aside, I think an MOU is something we have more control over. That certainly doesn't prevent the police department from making whatever changes to their manual they might see fit to conform to that. But that's within their authority, and I don't know that we need to negotiate those changes with them. But if you could kind of illustrate for us what we're talking about, negotiating with the police.
I'll give some examples. So there's a rule on investigation of complaints in OPA and how they go about that. And then it provides that there's certain types of those matters that will come to us rather than going to OPA. And it goes through various levels there. It goes through issues of confidentiality and how various documents will be held confidential. And then it has in there as far as us holding some of those documents confidential as well. It goes through the fact-finding process and timelines for getting things done. and then it has us incorporated into that as well. It discusses pre-investigation settlement provisions and has in there about our authority to do certain of those kind of mediations as well. So it's very in-depth. You know, it has to do with if there's an incident and people get notification to a call out to go report that there's been an incident, that we will get notified of that as well, and our personnel have the right to be on the scene.
I think then one way perhaps to approach that would be through an MOU and negotiate as a provision of the MOU that the police department would make the changes to their manual necessary to conform to the agreement in the MOU.
Ms. Ross.
And remember, we stated that we would have ongoing conversations with OPA and Metro Police Department. So we need to, that's one question. Now, you know, I definitely don't want us to insert into the Metro Police Department's manual. But a memorandum of agreement, I'm sure before. But maybe it's time that we continue to look at this and go ahead and make some beginning proposal of how they want to work with us, because he definitely said make a proposal all through our conversation with the police chief. So I think we should go back to the table if most people agree that it needs to be a memorandum of agreement.
If I can get a motion, because I think we're pretty in agreement with the MOU. So if there's no more discussion, I'm ready for a motion.
I move that we proceed with an MOU with Metro Police Department and the Office of Professional Accountability. Is that the right words?
Second.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any extensions? And
So one question to follow up for what Ms. Ross said as far as making the proposal to the police department is, considering the fact that we're going to want to get community input from the process, I guess one question we should discuss is it okay to put together a draft MOU for the purpose of presenting something to the police department as far as the general outline of what we're looking for before we get community input? Or is it the preference of the board that we bring something along to the point of, you know, like one of the earlier drafts that we've seen of the bylaws, to that level of specificity, then get community input, then take it to the police department, which will add a significant amount of time, but the question is, which is the preferred process? And then to advise the police department that we're taking them up on what they asked for. Here are the steps we're going to. This is why it's going to take this time. But we just want to let you know that we're going to make that detailed proposal.
yeah, and I think, and me and Mr. Sweeney talked about this. I think we have a good opportunity to start engaging those other people who applied to be on this board, and also the groups that nominated people to be on this board. And I think when it comes to engaging them, that's a really easy way to start getting public input on things of this nature. I'm not really sure what that process would look like.
In answer to the question, what could that process look like? We could let all of the organizations know that we're about to undertake this and give them an opportunity to invite one member of the board, perhaps a member of the board plus the executive director, to their meeting to have focused conversation about thoughts, and then that pair can bring back to meeting, et cetera. So people can sign up. We'll let them know that there's a certain, almost a public comment period. So for the next 4 weeks, you would have an opportunity to meet with us, to have our individuals come to your meeting. We can talk about that, and we'll take it back in order to meet our timeline. That's one possibility.
So can we take it back a step and first decide whether or not we're going to do police first and then community, or community first and police?
Okay.
Can we get that established
Absolutely.
first? And I would be in favor of engaging the police first, so that we have an idea of what would be an absolute no, I will not accept this, before we put more time into refining this document.
Ms. Ross?
But if you put the police first and community don't have input, then
Go ahead.
I just see that as the problem. I think before we go to the police, then we should have input from the community. That's just my thought.
And I guess I didn't finish what I was thinking in my head I was going to say, which is to share it with the police first as a draft and make it excruciatingly clear that this is a draft document and that we are taking input from the community, and we're going to consider that. And then we would have to bring it back to the police after that.
Let me say this, as far as the community is concerned, it's gonna be a little hectic going from one organization to another organization. If we have one meeting and have representatives from different organizations present to represent their organization and go in that direction instead of us going to this organization and going to that organization, it's be a lot of time, But I think if we bring them here and they have a spokesman from that organization, and then we can go from each organization, then we can go from there instead of going all over town.
And I think we can engage organizations and engage the police at the same time. I think that can both happen. I think we can walk and chew gum. Well, separately, however that needs to look. I'm talking about just getting the word out that this is the process that's happening. Mr. Martinez?
Yeah, I mean, just to go along with what you said about engaging the police at the same time, and what Member Lewis says as well, ultimately the police are going to have to agree to this. So if we focus our efforts on making something that they're ultimately not going to agree to, it's a lot of wasted time. So we need to really think intentionally about how we are engaging the police department in the process to make sure that they're coming along each step of the way, and that all the feedback that we're getting from the community isn't a waste.
Totally agree. I think as far as when it comes to engaging the police, I think I would love to hear from the people who are formerly police officers in this case. I think we have extended olive branches, and my fear is that it slows this process down. That's just my fear. So I'm willing to take suggestions or just hear more from the board about what they think we should be doing as far as making sure that this draft and this MOU and this process is moving along. Mr. Sweeney.
Two thoughts in that regard. First, on the task force. I am concerned that going out to each of the organizations and doing a separate meeting could take a lot of time that maybe could be better spent. And that maybe if we solicited the organizations to ask them for one or more representatives who could then be part of a task force, who then could take a draft that we have put together and review that with their constituency as they think appropriate, but then they, as the representative, meet with us as members of a task force to then go through a draft and help work through that might make the drafting easier and the timing faster. So that may be a opportunity. And then as far as the police and who we engage first, the community or the police, maybe following up on the suggestion that you made, Mr. Campbell-Gooch, is put together the draft, give it to those who have served in the police department, and say, okay, what are they going to have problems with? You know, what are they unlikely to agree to, or does all of this look fine? How would you adjust it because of concerns that you expect from them? And use the members here of the board as kind of a sounding board as to what we might get, and then go to the community and then go to the police. And maybe in the meantime have some kind of just kind of indirect meetings, discussions, or whatever with the head of OPA, and kind of float ideas and maybe float provisions along the way, and see if that provides input before providing them with a full document, maybe.
Dr. Hillers?
I think Mr. Sweeney's recommendation is sound. It meets one of the concerns that I had, that the maximum number of individuals in a community have an opportunity to hear and consider it together. So getting a draft out to an organization, making sure that they can talk and then funnel it back through meets the concern that perhaps I haven't thought through all the way. I do think that is different than having one meeting where people show up. Folks aren't going to have enough time for airtime as between the meetings. You're not going to be able to settle the concerns that have been brewing in the community. That did not feel like we were truly going to generate voices. So that idea of getting the drafts out, getting a comment period, getting it back in, works for me. Thank you.
Mr. Sweeney, you've talked about preparing a draft. And I just raise as a question, what would be the most effective way of moving from where we are right now to having a final product? And let me just throw out an idea. I wonder if for purposes of organizing this community discussion and discussion with the police, whether this isn't a two-step process, starting with a term sheet which deals with kind of major concepts that need to be in this document. And then moving from there to a detailed MOU. I'm concerned if we come out at the start with a detailed MOU, then there's a possibility of just getting lost in the weeds of wordsmithing language.
Well, two things. On the rules, they're significantly advanced.
Yes.
And I think Mr. Whedon and I can get together and work through a number of issues that we have, and then that document is ready to come back to the Rules Committee itself for further vetting, and it would be close to a stage at which it would be good to share it with the community. As far as the MOU, I think the issues are pretty well identified by the work that Director Whedon has done in going through the manual. So I actually think that it's at a stage where he can draft the MOU, and then he and I can work on that in advance and then come back and bring that again to the Rules Committee and have the Rules Committee go through that and make whatever suggestions that it's going to. Now, that's probably a 2-meeting process, one on the rules and one on the MOU. It may be possible to do 2 meetings like that before the next board meeting, but it's asking a lot of people. So it's at best a month process and maybe a 2-month process before it's in a position to be shared with the community. And I think it's probably best to share both the MOU and the rules at the same time, because, you know, they kind of touch on each other in certain points. And it'd be good for people to say, well, you don't have this in the rules, so how's that going to get addressed? And if you have both of the documents together, I think it may see how the pieces fit together better. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mr. Holloway?
Well, the whole process really basically concerned Davidson County, plus the people in the community, this board, police department. Now is the time for us to work together, whether we like it or not.
Yep.
Because the issue that's blooming out here now affect us all, whether we're involved in it or not. So it's time for us to work together.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Holloway. Ms. Ross?
I basically agree with Mr. Sweeney. We've done a lot with the rules, and Mr. Wheaton's done a lot with MOU. We put those pieces together, and I think it will take a couple of meetings going back and forth, but I believe you two can spearhead the charge.
Yeah, I definitely think so. We've put together most of the substantive issues, so it wouldn't take much for Mrs. Sweeney and I to put that memorandum together. Yeah. I think we could get that done.
Yeah. And if I can speak to my end, I'm willing to engage as many community members as I can from those organizations, and I don't think that would take a lot to engage them. I think just gauging the temperature in the room, I think they would be excited to be involved in that way. So if we can talk timetable, I know you said 2 months, 1 month process.
Well, I mean, if the committee, I mean, first of all, Mr. Wheaton has a lot going on, still finishing out the staff and all like that. So if he can have the MOU within 2 weeks, and then I can look at it for a couple of days, then we could have a meeting of the committee 3 weeks out from now, and that could take care of the MOU for further discussion by the group. And then if the committee is willing to do 2 meetings in this month, we could do another meeting in a week or so to start working on the rules again. And then we could have all of it ready for discussion with the board, not necessarily for board blessing, but for board permission to then share it with the community. So I would say a month out, 5 weeks out, and then have a task force, maybe get the word out, have a task force established from representatives of those groups, and then have them meet during that next month, and then meet with the rules committee or whatever to get feedback on that. And so at the next board meeting, not our next board meeting in June, but at our July board meeting, we could then provide the input from the community as to the rules in the MOU. I think that schedule will work if the members of the committee have the ability to do 2 meetings in the month, which is hard. It's a lot to do.
I'm available because I'm on the committee. So I just wanted to put that out. Any more discussion, concerns? Yes, Ms. Marsh.
I just want to make sure that I'm clear that we are talking about doing a task force of organizations, members of those organizations in the community. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things I would like to propose is possibly having someone from the police department on that task force or that committee, maybe a deputy chief. I think it would help us cut down on revisions. If somebody's there that says, well, this is our policy, and then we could do this, or this is not, this is gonna contradict one of our policies, and we'll have to do this. I think it'll be beneficial to have a person from the police department on that task force.
The only thing that would change is that at the same time that we're providing the draft out to the community organizations, we'd be providing the draft to the police department, where we had at least tentatively discussed getting input from the community before we went to the police.
Well,
So if we're going to give it to the deputy chief or somebody who's a representative of the police department, they're obviously going to take it and vet it in the police department the same sort of way the community organizations are going to do that. I'm not saying that's bad.
Right.
I'm just saying that it changes what we were discussing before.
yeah, but I think it will also help us cut down on time and how many times we have to keep going back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Marsh. Ms. Marsh?
I agree with you, and that's why we asked for the manual, and the chief suggested that we did get the manual. Now, Marcus was supposed to put a boundary together for us, so suggested that we could do that, but we've been working off some of their procedures from their manual in the rules committee.
One thing, the manual is available online for those that don't know. It's up to date, but it's 1,200 pages. I think that was a little cost prohibitive for us to put together 11, 12 manuals for everyone. But if we need to, we can. But it is available online. There's probably only 3 or 4 chapters of that. I think there's 17 chapters in the manual that are really related to what we need to do here on the board. But
Thank you. That's good news. So what I'd like to recommend we do is have a link to the entire manual on the COB website, and also some specific links to the chapters that you recommend to focus on. So once again, the community, our entire community, can come to our Metro website and click along and follow.
okay.
So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Do we need to, yes, Mr. Martinez?
I just want to say that now is a great time for the community engagement portion. As elections are coming up, a bunch of community organizations are coming together to form their platforms, their perspectives on different policies in the city. And there's definitely organizations that are including this board and how they like it to function in their platform. So I think now is the opportune time to just keep engaging the community.
I agree. I definitely agree with all that's been said, especially engaging community groups and having a deputy chief there as well. If any, that's what I was going to say. If anyone is willing to motion, present a motion.
I move that we form a task force to generate a draft MOU so that that draft and the existing draft of the rules may be presented to the public, and that the task force have at least one member of the police department at the level of a deputy chief.
Question, when is the task force imposed into this? I thought we were going back to the rules committee and do some work, and then the board, the community input in the Metro National Police Department. So when are we incorporating the task force?
If we move and vote for the creation of the task force now, then the task force, I can make the motion for the task force to begin its work subsequent to the next meeting of the rules. So it becomes active as soon as you have the next meeting. Does that work?
As soon as the Rules Committee thinks it's...
Yeah, as soon as we have a draft for presentation, which hopefully we would have after the next board meeting.
Okay,
After the
everything that I
June board
said. Such task force to be operative after the Rules Committee completes its work and is ready for it to engage.
Second.
I just have one question for clarification. Now, the task force will include members of this board or representatives from this board and the community, or what?
So,
My sense was, not to say that it should be this way, that the task force would be non-members of this board, and that the task force would then meet with the Rules Committee in order to get input, and then it would still be the responsibility of the Rules Committee to do the drafting that this board and the police department would consider.
right. And for purposes of this board, the task forces only have one board member, correct?
It has,
And I don't know that, does it have to have one?
Well, we need to know what they come up with.
Yeah, I believe for clarity, it makes sense to have one board member at least to report back.
Okay. Because my sense was that we would meet with the task force and the Rules Committee would meet together with the task force, but.
Yeah. I mean, because I think it makes a lot of sense to have at least one member of the Community Oversight Board as a part of the task force in general, and then have those, and we can wait to decide what community or what member of the COB is a part of that task force. But as far as point of clarity right now, we have a motion, and seconded by Ms. Lewis.
Yes.
Okay. Any discussion on that motion? Does
Let me
anybody
read the
need to
motion
Thank you.
so that I can make sure we have it, and move it and edit as she sees appropriate. Motion to form a task force to generate a draft MOU so that the draft MOU and the existing rules can be presented to the Metro Police Department. Further, that the Deputy Police Chief be invited to join the task force. The task force will begin its work. Well, the task force shall be operative after the Rules Committee completes its work. Is that an accurate statement of your motion?
I believe so.
Discussion, Ms. Marshall?
I guess I have a question. How do we come up with this task force? My suggestion is that we create it in the Rules Committee, that we go down the list, and if I understand you correctly, that task force is going to have the organizations that nominated members to this board, correct?
That were nominated part of the 182.
Yes, yes. So I suggest that the Rules Committee can go look at that list, and we come up with those organizations, and then we figure out some type of way to contact those organizations and see who want to participate in having members sit on that task force. And I suggest that we do that in the Rules Committee because it seems like the Rules Committee is going to meet a lot of times.
Is it better for the Rules Committee to do that, or to actually delegate that responsibility to Mr. Whedon and his staff so that they can get to know those organizations at the same time?
I agree. Or somebody do it. But yeah, I agree that is
That's all responsibility
that's pretty
of
good.
somebody
Yeah,
else.
yeah.
Mr. Holloway.
We'll accept that.
Mr. Holloway.
It would be important that we as an organization invite the different organizations here, just one or two, and let them know what we're looking at and how. In other words, we need to form them, not let them form us. Let them know this is what we need, this is what we're looking at, and so then they'll know what they need to do, and then they can report to us.
Ms. Marsh?
I guess my only thing with that is that if you're speaking about the board itself, our next meeting is not until next month, and so I just want to kind of keep that in mind. If that's what you're speaking of, is that It could be
the executive board or whomever,
Okay.
but report to us, period, whether it be the board or the executive director.
Gotcha.
But let them know this is our vision. This is what we're looking at. And we just want to invite different people from the organization come and participate as a member, was it MOA? A member of understanding?
So,
Yeah, for sake of clarity, I know we're having a large discussion, but there is an amendment, and I want to get a vote on this, and then we can motion the particulars. So I know Bob is editing it right now. If you can kind of read that, and we can kind of vote on it, so we can keep it moving.
Give me 1 second.
Yeah, no problem. Take your time.
Talk amongst yourselves. If I may.
Yes.
I would propose as a friendly amendment to the motion, following motion to form a task force to review and comment on the memorandum of understanding and rules prepared by the Rules Committee prior to the memorandum of understanding being presented to the Metropolitan Police Department. Further move that a chief of the police department be invited to join the task force. Further move that the task force will be operative after the Rules Committee, let's say, completes its work on the draft MOU and rules. But this work won't finish until it's all done. I offer that as a friendly amendment to the motion.
Mr. Lewis.
No, I want her to accept accept or deny the friendly amendment first.
Any discussion?
I accept the friendly amendment, and I think that further amend that creation of a task force as defined by the Rules Committee. I'd like to get Member Marsh's language in there about the Rules Committee should come up or whatever. No, that's right. Exactly.
Yes.
So what needs to be in that language that indicates that the task force as defined by the executive director? Whatever language needs to be there to indicate who's going to be forming it. That would be, yes, I accept it with that language.
Then I have a friendly amendment to also offer, if you will consider it, just to add the chief of police or his designee.
Yeah.
As opposed to the deputy chief, you mean?
Yes. Is that acceptable to everyone? Or?
I think we use
Police chief or his designee, not to be less than a deputy.
Chief or his deputy?
I think when you read your friendly amendment, you had included the chief of police. Is that not correct?
I said
Deputy
chief.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the word deputy.
I
Okay,
was
there's
hearing-
several
I was
deputy
hearing that
chiefs,
there was
right?
a-
Right.
Okay.
There's more than
So
one.
listen, I just didn't hear the word deputy.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Mr. Sweeney? Mr. Sweeney?
can I make one other suggestion, is we probably should set the size or limit the size of the task force to a certain number of, members.
Is there a recommendation?
Probably 1 or 2 per organization.
Well, it depends on how many organizations.
Yeah, we gotta look at
So I
this.
mean, it probably might be best to say, 10 or something like that. I think 10 or less, otherwise I think it gets,
You have more organizations than 10.
I know it, but there's,
I would not,
but you
if you're
think
gonna do
there's-
it that way, limit it to 1 per organization, that,
Ms. Ross? I was going to let you go with it, you know what I'm saying?
limited to 1 organization that made the nomination. Since we have so many, and maybe that may be something we may have to table until Mr. Wheaton finds out how many organizations made nominations.
my only
Mr. Sweeney?
issue is I was concerned of a group getting too big to be unwieldy.
I understand.
If you're going to want to use it actually to help draft and change language and add provisions and stuff like that.
So then we are leaving the
Leaving that out.
composition of the task force to be determined later.
Yes.
Size, yes.
depending on who Mr. Wheaton is.
And Mr. Wheaton presumably could confer with the executive committee if he needs guidance between the two board meetings.
Absolutely.
Or the Rules Committee.
For clarification, can you read the motion again?
Yes.
In order to accept any amendments.
Okay.
Write it out.
Yeah, we're doing it, please. And Mr. Wheaton, I'm more than willing to assist in this process of creating this task force. Just bounce any ideas off of me as much as you possibly can.
I will accept your volunteerism.
Yep.
And I'm also, I mean, just off this, but I'm also willing to serve if the size is large. I mean, if we're delightfully surprised by a large number, to work with figuring out a way to facilitate a large, I mean, large meeting facilitation is possible, and I'm happy to help with that so that we don't have to be limited to size.
All right, thank you.
This motion keeps getting longer and longer.
Trying to put it in the
Well, I appreciate that.
I'm glad to have so many friends.
Bob was definitely a rapper in a former life, by the way.
My brain is too dead at 4 o'clock to even come up with these.
Let's try this. Motion to form a task force to review and comment on the memorandum of understanding and the rules prepared by the Rules Committee prior to the presentation of the memorandum of understanding to the Metropolitan Police Department, to invite a deputy police chief to join the task force, and for the task force to begin its work after the Rules Committee has presented drafts of both documents to the board for review and preliminary approval.
Can we change the verbiage as it relates to the
Police chief?
representative from the police department to
Yes, I would welcome.
the chief of police or his designee?
Is that acceptable to the movement?
Is police chief or designee, are you worried that, right?
Do you, so I guess the question is, what impact would it have to have the chief of police sitting in on a task force that's creating an MOU for the police department? Or is it the same impact as having a deputy chief?
Yeah, I can answer that right there.
Mr. Holland.
He your boss. What you gonna do? Are they gonna tell him no? So if you get the head man say commit to it, then everybody else gonna fall in line. Simple.
That's cool.
What do you say? To go to Ms. Marsh's point, I think there is a little bit of tension to inviting a member of the police department to be a member of this task force, advising us on a document that we will then be negotiating with the police department. I do think it would be perfectly appropriate to extend an invitation to the department to attend and observe the proceedings of the task force, just in the interest of full transparency.
Well,
but they will have their opportunity to comment during the negotiations.
The chief has a lot of things that he has to do, and 9 times out of 10, if he can't do it, he can always designate a deputy chief or somebody that they're going to represent his department. So that you start at the top.
Agreed. Although my concern is just the tension there that we're going to be negotiating this directly with the police department. And so does it make sense for them to be part of this other body that is providing us with advice?
Ms. March, what are you thinking?
So the suggestion was made as a way to try to save time and to cut down on having to keep going back and making revisions. If we had someone there from the police department that could provide some guidance. That was that's why it was suggested. But I do understand exactly what you're saying as well. I do understand. I think they're both something equal to consider. What you're saying and what the suggestion was.
Mr. Sweeney?
What about inviting the head of OPA?
I definitely think we need to maximize the opportunity to interact with what seems to be a tenuous relationship up to this point. So I do think this is an opportunity to meet on level ground. I think we should leave it as deputy chief. My gut feeling is just to ride with what Ms. Marsh kind of presented before. I think the more engagement we can get on that level, the better off we'll be and the quicker the process will go.
Mr. Holloway.
Mr. Holloway, sorry.
Well, like I said before, I start with the chief. We just want to open the door so we can have a relationship, so we can kind of negotiate. It's tension in the air.
For sure.
So we want to just try to bring everybody represented from all walks of life to the drawing table. Chief is the man. And if he can't do it, then he can always say deputy chief, assistant chief, whomever. And he does it all the time. You know, out of respect, the chief.
Mr. Turner.
Well, let me agree with Mr. Holloway. The police department is a quasi-military organization with a chain of command. And you have the chief as the head of that department. And then you have deputy chiefs that are over various functions within the police department. And I just think that if the invitation is going to be extended for the police department to participate, it should go through the chief of police, and he can designate whomever he chooses, whether it's the director of OPA, whether it's a deputy chief, whether it's a commander at one of the precincts, or whomever he chooses to designate to participate, if we want the police department to have representation on this task force. And that's just, I guess that will be our decision whether we decide that they should be represented. And I think from the conversation that I'm hearing is that we're most in agreement that it would be a good idea to involve the police department. So, but I think the invitation should be extended to the chief of police. And let that person, let the chief designate whomever he wants to represent the department.
Thank you.
Yes.
In careful consideration from colleagues who have served on the police department, I'm going to accept Chief Turner's amendment, and that the language be the invitation be extended to the chief of police or his designee.
Then see if this is suitable to invite the chief of police or his designee, or to invite the chief of police for him or his designee to represent the Metro Police Department on the task force.
Does anybody need reading of the total motion one more time? Anybody?
I got us in trouble last time. Since it is kind of a new motion, you might want to get a new second.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Mr. Sweeney.
I've got,
Mr. Sweeney, yes, sir.
I've got one more issue from the committee.
Yes, sir.
And now that the Bylaws Committee has completed its responsibilities, I would suggest that the Rules Committee and the Bylaws Committee be merged into a single committee. And that way, Mr. Kamaguchi, you get to serve with the Rules Committee as we go forward on this, since you're the only person who's not on both.
I'll accept the invitation. Is that a motion?
So I don't know if that needs to be a formal motion.
What would this new committee be called?
It would be called the Bylaws and Rules Committee. We'll put an asterisk. We'll put an asterisk.
Do we need the motion yet?
So move that the Bylaws and Rules Committee be merged into a single committee to be called the Bylaws and Rules Committee.
Discussion?
I second.
Okay. Discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Any abstentions? Great.
That's all the committees have.
Great.
Those committees have.
Any new business? Good. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? All abstentions?
So if the members of the joint committees would watch their emails, I'm going to be sending around something to try to find convenient.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.